So I'm the head cattle buyer at Tyson. My main focus is to oversee the procurement of 7 million head of cattle a year, 135,000 a week, 26,000 a day. And I do that by working with approximately 4,000 suppliers, cattle feeders. So I have a long day. I go home at night pretty tired. I want to talk a little bit about the consumer, what they're looking for. And I'm going to do it from the practical side and from the relationship, from the feeder side of the business. You're going to hear me talk about some key words: relationships, trust, loyalty, alignment, collaboration, and a key word, transparency. So, in the cattle business, we have to know what the consumer wants. And the first thing the consumer wants, in my eyes, is transparency. They want to know where that animal was born, where it was raised, where it was fed, and how it was processed. And they want to know way more than that. They want to know who owned the cow herd, who owns the feed yard, what's their families like, how do they handle their business, how do they handle the food that we eat, how are they fed, how are they taken care of in the hospital when they get sick. So we have to work with our suppliers to tell the story. And that's basically what the consumer wants, is they want a story. They want to see the pictures. They want to know how that animal's been handled. So I work with our suppliers to do that. Dr. King from Cactus told me yesterday that they actually do about 100 tours a year in the Cactus feed yards, 2 a week. That's a pain in the butt for a feedlot manager, but it's what we need to do. We do hundreds of tours to our packing houses during the year, showing the consumer the story and the transparency. We're pretty proud of that, and we need to get better at that. We need to do a lot more of that. Talk a lot about animal welfare. 2012, we started a project at Tyson called Farm Check. How many of you have heard of Farm Check? It's basically showing the consumer that we know how the animal should be treated and we do it right. So we audit 5 to 10% of our supply every year. Been doing it for 6 years now. It's third-party verified. It's got some teeth in it. They have to pass the test. When we started this, we got some pretty good kickback. Cattle feeders couldn't figure out why we didn't know what they knew, that they were doing it right. A lot of feedlots refused to let us in. We don't see that today. Feedlots are very open to it. A lot of them are happy that they got picked because they want to tell the story. So the Farm Check program, I wish our competitors were doing it too. We're the only packer that does this, but it does prove to the consumer that cattle feeders know what they're doing and they're doing it right. BQA, you've heard of BQA, Beef Quality Assurance. My cattle buyers are all certified. How many are certified? I suggest we do it. It took me an hour and a half. That's got to be worst case. I mean, you guys probably do it in less than an hour. Just go to bqa.com, take the test, take the study. I think it's well worth it. You need to know what the consumer's looking for. It's a great program. We're gonna ask that all of our suppliers be BQA certified by January 1st of 2019. We're not there yet. We're probably 75, 80% there. But it's what the consumer wants. We've got retailers and wholesalers telling us, get them BQA certified. So if they're not BQA certified January 1st, we're not going to be able to buy their cattle. I'm confident that we'll have it 100% as we get into the first of the year, though. It's the right thing to do. BQA is a good program. It's not third-party verified. The next step, Tyson believes, is a program called Progressive Beef. I'm going to let Kevin talk about that here in a little bit. Food safety, we beat that to death already. We've got a lot of people employed at Tyson. That's their job, to make sure we don't have a recall from whatever it is, E. coli or salmonella or whatever it is. Recalls cost a lot of money and they hurt beef demand. So we're taking it very seriously at Tyson. And we haven't had a major recall in quite some time, so we're getting better at it. This is a big one. Mexico has it, Canada has it, we don't. We need it. You know, we all know the main reasons for having traceability. Disease control. If something happens, we need to narrow down that infected area, the smallest possible area, so that we can get on with business and not hurt beef demand. To gain international acceptance, we need traceability. The first hurdle to get a box of beef into China is they have to be ranch verified. They have to have the tag before they leave the ranch. We've got more and more ranchers doing that. We've got a lot of feedlots that are doing it right now. We've got 2 of our plants where a lot of days we're 60, 70% EID tag through the whole day. That's promising. It's coming. The main reason on my side is to improve beef demand by improving quality. A lot of feedlots, if they don't have the tag when the calf gets there, they'll put a tag in their ear. And they'll monitor that calf all the way through the process. If we receive cattle with an EID tag at Tyson, we will give the information back as far as liver damage, kill floor condemnation damage, hide damage, grading. They get all their grading. It's a big tool in the toolbox for a cattle feeder to know this set of cattle performed very well throughout the whole process. I'm going to go back and try to buy them again next fall. Or this pen of cattle had some problems. Either got to fix them, or I'm going to go to a different supplier. So traceability is big. It's going to stay big, and it's what the consumer wants. Just like I said, they want to know where that animal's been throughout its whole life. Sustainability, that's not going away anytime soon either. Let me give you a good example in the packing house that we're really proud of at Tyson. A couple years ago, we raised our workers' pay. They didn't ask for it. A lot of contracts weren't due. We just gave them more money. We also talk about safety. We want to make sure our workers are safe. We start every meeting at Tyson talking about recordable injuries and how safe we're keeping our people. If there is an injury, we go back and try to figure out how do we prevent that. Our injury percentages, our recordable percentages are weighed out. I don't have that number. I don't know if you know, Kevin, but it's substantial. So we're keeping the workers safe. We're paying them more. We're giving them an extra break at the end of their shift so they can stretch and do whatever they need to do to remain productive. And, you know, that doesn't come without a cost. It's really expensive to do that. We spend a lot of money. It put us at a disadvantage to our competitors, but we're starting to see the return. Our retention rates, our turnover rates at Tyson are less than 24%. 3-4 years ago, it was probably 70%. So we're keeping our people. We're keeping them trained. So what's that mean for a cattle feeder? That means we got a better yield because we know what we're doing. Better dress job. It's presented to the government at the grading table in a better manner, so it increases grade. I don't know the last time we've been below 80% choice in our grade in our plants. It's probably been 6 months, 8 months. And it's also a better product going out the back of the plant. So better workmanship. So that's a different form of sustainability, but it's a big one at Tyson. We're pretty proud of that. Quality. the consumer will pay more for beef, and they have to pay more for beef because beef is worth more. There's value out there in chicken and pork, but unless you've been living underneath a great big rock the last 2 years, you know beef demand is off the charts. We've got a lot of supply coming at us. We've been able to hold the price at a pretty good level because of beef demand. It's been really good, and I think it will stay good. We had a major retailer come to us about 3 years ago, talked about how they were going to redesign their meat case. They're going to go to upper 2/3 choice Angus, CAB spec. It's a big retailer, 31 distribution centers. We told them, well, we learned pretty quickly we weren't going to say no to this retailer. So we told them, give us 2 years. And they said 2 years is too long, but do what you can for us. So we stopped slaughtering dairy cattle. We changed a few grids, paid a few more premiums for CAB type cattle, for black-eyed cattle. And within about 6 months, we filled their distribution centers. So it was a huge success story. It's what the consumer wanted, and we did it through our suppliers, through collaboration, through education. Because of that, we did increase beef demand. There's no doubt in my mind. Then the last one is what we've been talking about, antibiotic usage. I'm not going to beat that to death, but in the last 90 days, I've been in every region that we compete in. I've seen a lot of cattle, I've seen a lot of feedlots, and I like the term responsible antibiotic usage because it's going on. I know, I see it firsthand. I like to tell people the only empty pens that I've seen are the sick pens. Cattle are healthy, they're vibrant, they're growing well, they're working well right now, so cattle feeders know the story, they know what they're doing. And so we've got a really good story to tell. We're getting better at it, but we've got to continue to tell a story. We've got a supply chain out there that does it right, and we need to somehow figure out how to get that to the consumer in a quicker manner. We all win when it helps beef demand. I'm going to let Kevin talk about the supply or the retailer and the wholesaler side of the business. I forgot something. I forgot my most important slide. This is what I'm most proud of. Nobody else has this. We have a supplier creed. This goes for both beef and pork. You know, it's got all the key words in there: alignment, collaboration, education, transparency. I'm not going to read it all, but pretty proud of that. That's how important our suppliers are to us at Tyson. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Kevin Hueser. Actually, my title is Beef Margin Management. I think it's right in the bios. I've been in the business for 35 years. Most of that time has been on the sales and marketing side. Prior to joining IBP, I grew up on a family farm in northwest Iowa. Pretty diversified farm. I think the only things we didn't raise were llamas and goats. We had a cow-calf herd. We've had about 1,000 head of cattle back in the day. We farrowed 60 sows the old-fashioned way, in farrowing crates, letting them out twice a day, and we'd finish those hogs on site. We had sheep, because everybody had to have sheep to take care of weeds, because every time you bought a piece of land, you had an acreage you had to keep up. So, and we farmed about 1,500 acres, and I look at the changes that my father would have seen in his lifetime in that business, and I think about my time within the meat business with IBP. I started in 1984. We had two breaks back in those days. We had choice and we had no roll. You look at it today, we sort carcasses in 54 different fashions in our plants. And remember, most of these plants are the same plants that existed in 1984. The coolers are the same size. We just have figured out a way to do more sorts and add more complexity to what seemed like a pretty complex system 30 years ago. And then you look at what we see from the consumer side of it. Selling beef and pork in the 1990s was pretty easy. We harvested the animal, ran it through the grading station, we put it in a box, we shipped it off to a retailer or a wholesaler. That retailer or wholesale was responsible for the brand, the specs. As is today, most of the proteins that you see, and in particular beef in a grocery store, marketed underneath that grocery store's banner. You're starting to see more branded products come into the marketplace, but we're probably well behind most other commodities in that regard. You can see here the relationship of the buyer and seller. You know, I grew up in my career, most of that time being where the seller controlled the information, right? We made the product, we determined what we could make, what was most efficient, what worked best in our manufacturing facilities. We communicated that information to our customer, and it's really not that much different than what it was 35 or 40 years ago at the consumer level, right? Procter & Gamble and all these folks made a product. The product label consisted of the information that they wanted to share, and they advertised the product, and the customer controlled the buying decision. And if he or she didn't like it, they'd tell their neighbor, or they might tell their sister or their family, hey, I bought this and it wasn't very good, or I bought this and it was wonderful. That's changed, and in a big part, as you just heard from the discussion on blockchain, one of the biggest reasons is the flow of information. Today, we still control the manufacturing of that product and the attributes to a degree, but the customer controls what information is shared. You know, either they have over time demanded that information take place in proof and labeling, or they'll go out and do research on that product. They walk into a grocery store, they want to know something about it, they can Google it, they can get access, they can learn, more importantly, probably alternatives. And is there something else out there that might be more catered to what their desires are, what their experiences, what they want to learn? And that information is shared in the speed of light today. The amount of information that transfers on a daily basis is incredible, and most of you young folks in here know that way better than I do, but it's a completely different world. The consumer today has the bulk of control. We still get to determine the manufacturing practice, but a big part of what goes into that product and the attributes of that product are determined by our consumers today. And even though in 2001 we became a consumer company in a big way, in 2001 is when Tyson bought IBP, and we all of a sudden found ourselves into the branded business. We've always been a supplier to manufacturers, but we had very few customer-facing brands. We were trying to evolve to that point, but in the early 2000s, we hadn't evolved very far in that regard. Tyson brought us into a whole new era. We became a supplier of raw materials to brands, Hillshire, Jimmy Dean, and today those brands have expanded. So the amount of information that is brought onto us as a supplier, now we're representing that consumer brand. We also have customers, as John said, we have hundreds of visitors in our plants on a regular basis, and those folks are all coming at us with a way that they're trying to differentiate themselves from their competitors. They want to know, can you do this, can you do this? And in the old days, our answer was no. We were all about low cost, high revenue producer, right? How can we get the most volume through our plants at the most efficient way? We've learned very quickly over time that if we don't fill that consumer need, somebody will. The discussion John had about that retailer that converted to their spec, I can tell you that the majority of the people in our organization said there's no way we can do that. There's no way we can get that many black-hided cattle that are a great upper two-thirds choice in this amount of time. And why do they want it? Their customer base, can't support that program. That was our initial thoughts. But I'll tell you that the mentality has changed dramatically in our industry as well as I think any of our peer industries as well. It's not a matter of finding reasons why we can't, it's a matter of finding solutions to those problems. And we were fortunate that we had a rebuilding of the herd. We had a powerful genetic stream that was coming in line. It was good timing. Corn was cheap. So with the help of our producers and our willingness to pay for it and that customer's willingness to absorb those costs, we were able to pass those costs onto our savings onto our consumer. And that story has been successful, much more than what we thought it was. When you think about premium brands today, you know, my dad, or we all grew up with premium thinking that it was Cadillac, it was Lincoln, you know, it was Caviar. That definition has changed pretty dramatically. Today's consumer views premiums in a much different fashion. They view premium in transparency. They view premium in local. They view premium in how it's raised. They want complex flavors. You can see all of these different things listed here on this slide. But premium has a completely different meaning. And what we're finding out, not only within our consumer brands under the Tyson and Hillshire legacy brands, we're also seeing that within our commodity business as well, and the customers demanding those attributes from ourselves. Consumers are willing to pay for the experience. As I said, we have 54 sorts in our plants today. That's pretty incredible when you think about 30 years ago we had 2. We have natural offerings, we have NHTC offerings, we have soon to have a very small grass offering as we try to put our toe in the water there, and I expect that over time we will have a consistent grass offering. These things resonate with the consumer, and it's viewed as a premium type of a program. And a big part of that is the rearing of the animal, and John talked a little bit about BQA. And I was a little envious yesterday as the folks were up here talking about pork. PQA and PQA Plus, way ahead of the beef industry. There's reasons for it. We have over 4,000 suppliers. And I would tell you that when we were asked to get our supply chain to be 100% BQA trained, we had buyers that absolutely cringed by that thought process that we were going to go out and tell our suppliers, you need to go out and get trained in this program. We probably had 50 or 60% of our total supply that were already BQA certified, but it was in a small number of feed yards that were large feed yards and commercial yards that were already on board. When you start thinking about getting up into the regions where you have farmer feeders who may feed 30 head a year, 50 head a year, and those cattle are important to us, and they need to have a place to market those animals. But while we've always believed, and we have a lot of faith in our suppliers, we believe we have the best suppliers in the industry. We know that they're doing the right thing. We know that they're doing the right thing in terms of animal care. The stewards of the land and the animal have always been the producer. A sick, unhealthy, or mistreated animal has never been profitable. And I'll tell you, nobody can explain that to you better than the farmer or rancher can. But we had a lot of folks who were not BQA certified, and we're going to get there. We got nudged by a customer who said, we want to be able to take this to our consumers. Our consumers want to know that we are doing business with people that are being supplied with animals that are being treated properly. So we rolled out our BQA training, and as John said, we're nearly there. But it has been quite an opportunity, particularly when you get into regions with sale barns and small feeders. But it is the right thing to do. But I envy the pork folks. They've been well ahead of this. And then by 2020, we're going to catch up to them in transportation as well. By January 1st of 2020, all of the transporters of beef to our facilities will be BQA trained. John touched a little bit on progressive beef, and we're excited about this. BQA is the foundation, as we like to put it. Our suppliers are BQA trained, and that's a completely animal well-being program. How many folks in here have heard of progressive beef? A few of you? We've had the privilege of doing business with a group of producers in Kansas for a number of years, probably going on 25 years now-ish, 25, maybe a little more. Small producers, or at the time were small producers, and they wanted to figure out a way how they could work together to have a little bit more market leverage. So they formed a marketing group. It's called the Beef Marketing Group. Most of you are probably familiar with them. And progressive beef for them started as a way, if we're going to represent these cattle, we have to have some type of a standard of behavior. We want to make sure that if we're going to market your cattle, we want to make sure that you're raising them to the same standards that we're marketing our cattle. There are expectations that we should have to meet. And it's been an evolution. First, focusing on animal well-being, the principles of BQA. Every progressive beef yard is BQA trained. But they've taken it further. The 3 pillars: animal safety, animal well-being, food safety, and sustainability. Food safety, you folks are all probably very familiar with the feed ingredient, Bovamine Defend. During a big part of the late 80s and 90s, we started to deal with E. coli. A lot of progressive feed yards started trying to take measures to try to limit and reduce the amount of E. coli that might be being transferred with their animals into the packing plants. A lot of it was the fear that someday the feed yard was probably going to get blamed for it. Well, we've avoided that, but we've also recognized that if we can reduce that pathogen and reduce recalls and increase the perception of how safe beef is to the consumer, we'll sell more beef. So this group also has standards of expectations in terms of cleanliness of the yard, cleanliness of the water source, the feed sources, and those things. And at one time, they were required to feed Bovamine Defend. That does not take place today. But the expectations and the standards of how the yards are maintained are part of that food safety culture that's there. And sustainable production practices. Now, that's not just in terms of when you think about making sure that you're properly managing the land or your lagoon or your wastewater or manure application. That also has to do with sustaining the ag environment and the economy in which you live. There's requirements for these producers to spend a certain amount of their money in local stores, local businesses, feed trucks, grain, pharmaceuticals, a number of different things. The expectation is that they want to keep that agriculture business sustainable. They want to have good suppliers, and they want to continue to develop the next generation of those types of businesses that support their opportunities. We had the opportunity. We were the sole receiver of those cattle for 30 years. We still are today. And we were offered the opportunity. You know, this group, let me go back a minute, this group has been very good about tours. You heard that Cactus gives a lot of tours, and I'm sure that Joan and her family, that she mentioned yesterday, they give a lot of tours. This group has been the same way. They've gotten a lot of exposure. A lot of customers have visited their feed yards, and when they talked about progressive beef, they didn't talk about progressive beef as something that they thought someday they would sell. They talked about it as a way of differentiating themselves from other suppliers. And again, trying to promote that beef is good. And it was raised properly and trying to increase consumption. We could have just said, yeah, we'll buy that program. As we thought about it, we decided that us being a packer in one of 4 major packers and probably another 10 or 12 smaller regional folks beyond that, that it isn't about us, right? We need beef consumption. We need people to want to crave that protein and buy more. We want beef to be sustainable. So we felt it was better for us to be a licensor in hopes that it's not just our supply chain that gets on board. It's the rest of the supply chain and the rest of the industry that gets on board. Why? Because it's the right thing for beef. It's the right thing to the consumer. The consumer wants to know how their animals are raised, how they're treated, how the sustainability efforts of the people raising that food, what they consist of, and how they're being managed. And we can have 13 or 14 different programs out there. It's just another opportunity to confuse the consumer. It's not an expensive process. We're paying consumers, are paying our suppliers after they're certified, which will more than reimburse their cost of implementation. But what it does is it conveys confidence back to the consumer. A big part of progressive beef is judicious use of antibiotics. And as I said, it's been an evolution for them, and it will continue to be an evolution. As we learn more about antibiotic management, as we learn more about other sustainability efforts and practices that can be implemented, it will be re-implemented. The best thing about progressive beef, though, is it's not simply a matter of taking a test and being trained. It's not simply a matter of getting a stamp on it. It is an audited program. It is a USDA certified audited program. It's not audited by my team. It's not audited by competing feedlots. It is audited by what used to be a third-party verifier. Today, they wouldn't necessarily be considered third-party, but they are USDA approved. And you have to meet that certification every 2 years, I believe it is, John, right? Every 2 years is the formal audit for recertification. again, just conveying the message. Consumers care, as you all are well aware of, and that's why you're here on the topic of antibiotics. Back in the old days, it was nice. All we worried about was getting them in the box, and today we're, as our other Packer peers have realized, we have a responsibility in this, and we have a responsibility in the education, and we have a responsibility in helping to influence those and continue to build demand for the proteins we produce. So appreciate the time and the opportunity to be here.